The notification preview lingered on the 65-inch screen while the entire family sat in stunned silence. My brother's name was at the top of the message, and the attached photo was undeniable. Sarah dropped the cake knife, the clatter echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she squinted at the explicit image. I stood by the light switch, my hand frozen mid-motion, watching my life disintegrate in 4K resolution. Sarah scrambled for the remote, her nails clicking frantically against the plastic buttons. "Don't you dare turn that off," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the pounding in my ears. My brother Mark pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. He did not look at me, he looked straight at Sarah with panic in his eyes. "It is not what it looks like," Sarah stammered, the universal slogan of the guilty. The photo on the screen was dated 3 hours ago while I was at work, and they were supposedly planning the anniversary party. My sister stood up, her face red with secondhand embarrassment and rising anger. Is that Mark's bedspread?" she asked, pointing accusingly at the screen. The room erupted into chaos as my father slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. I walked slowly towards the table, ignoring the screams and the tears starting to flow from Sarah's eyes. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back like she was radioactive. "Do not touch me," I said quietly, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Mark tried to speak, saying my name like he had any right to use it anymore. I turned to look at him, my younger brother, the best man at my wedding, the godfather to my son. "You are dead to me," I told him, watching the color drain from his face. My mother was crying hysterically now, clutching her chest, while my dad yelled at Mark to get out. But I was not done yet, because the phone had synced more than just one photo. I picked up the remote before Sarah could hide the evidence and scrolled to the next image. A screenshot of a positive pregnancy test sent 2 weeks ago. The caption read, "It is yours, we need to tell him soon." The silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than before. I looked at Sarah, who was now shaking uncontrollably, her hands covering her face. "So that is why you were pushy about renewing our vows next month," I said, the realization hitting me. "You wanted to lock me down before the bump started showing." Mark was backing toward the door, but my dad blocked his path, his face purple with rage. "Sit down, or I will put you down," my dad growled, a tone I had not heard since we were teenagers. Mark sat slumping into the chair like a deflated balloon. I looked at the guests, my friends, my colleagues, who were pretending to look anywhere but at us. "Get out," I said to the room at large. "Everyone leave now except for Sarah and Mark." The scramble was immediate as coats were grabbed and purses snatched from the couch. Within 2 minutes, the house was empty save for the broken family in the dining room. My mother refused to leave, sitting in the corner, sobbing into a napkin. My dad stood guard by the door, arms crossed, eyes locked on Mark. I sat at the head of the table, the spread of food looking nauseating to me now. "How long?" I asked, looking directly at Sarah. She sobbed harder, trying to garner sympathy that was not coming. "Answer him, Sarah," my dad barked, making her jump. 6 months, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. 6 months, I repeated, doing the math in my head. "That was right around the time you started working late on the merger project. And you, Mark, you were coming over to help with the renovation every weekend. You were not fixing the drywall, were you?" Mark looked at the floor, his cowardice on full display. "I loved her first," Mark mumbled, a pathetic excuse that made my blood boil. I laughed, a dry, hollow sound that scared me a little. "You loved her first, so you waited until we were married 5 years to do something about it. You are sick, Mark," my sister spat from the doorway, having refused to leave with the others. I pulled my phone out and opened the banking app, my thumb hovering over the joint account. I transferred half the savings to my personal account immediately, leaving just enough for bills. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, seeing the notification on her own phone. "I am protecting my assets before you drain them for your new life with my brother," I said coldly. "You cannot do that," she shrieked, suddenly finding her voice again. "Watch me," I said, standing up and walking towards the kitchen island. I grabbed the car keys off the hook, the ones for the SUV I paid for. "Where are you going?" she asked, panic rising in her voice again. "I am going to a hotel, and then I am going to a lawyer," I said, turning my back on her. "But what about the baby?" she cried out, desperation seeping into her tone. "Ask Mark about the baby," I said without looking back. "It is his problem now." I walked past Mark, who was still staring at the floor, and I felt nothing but disgust. My dad put a hand on my shoulder as I passed him, a silent gesture of support. I walked out the front door into the cool night air, taking the first breath that felt real in years. I got into the car and locked the doors just as Sarah came running out onto the porch. She banged on the window, screaming my name, but I just started the engine. I reversed out of the driveway, watching her shrink in the rearview mirror until she was just a speck. My phone blew up with texts from Mark begging me to listen. I blocked his number without reading a single one. I blocked Sarah next, then her parents, who were probably just finding out. I drove aimlessly for an hour, my mind replaying every interaction over the last 6 months. Every time they laughed a little too hard at each other's jokes. Every time Mark coincidentally showed up when I was working late. It was all so obvious now, the signs blinking like neon lights in retrospect. I pulled into the parking lot of a motel on the outskirts of town. It was not the Ritz, but it was far away from them. I checked in and collapsed onto the stiff mattress, staring at the popcorn ceiling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a crushing weight of grief and rage. My phone buzzed again. It was a notification from the home security system. Motion detected in the nursery. I opened the app and watched the live feed in green night vision. Sarah was standing over our son's crib, her shoulders heaving with sobs. My stomach twisted into knots thinking about Leo sleeping, unaware that his family was destroyed. Wait. I zoomed in on the screen. She was not just standing there. She was packing a bag. She was taking him. I sprang off the bed, rage replacing the exhaustion instantly. She was not taking my son anywhere, not to Mark, not to anyone. I ran out of the motel room, leaving the key card on the bed. I drove like a maniac back towards the house, running 2 red lights in the process. I called the police as I drove, my voice shaking as I reported a domestic disturbance. I did not care if it was petty. I needed a paper trail starting now. I pulled into the driveway just as Mark's truck was backing out. I swerved, blocking him and looking at the passenger seat. Sarah was there holding Leo, who was crying and confused. I jumped out of the car, my fists clenched, ready for war. Get out of the truck, I screamed, hitting the hood with my open palm. Mark locked the doors, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah was yelling something at him, telling him to drive around me. I scrambled onto the hood of his truck, smashing my fist against the windshield. I was not thinking, I was just reacting, pure instinct to protect my cub. Mark honked the horn, trying to scare me off, but I did not move. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder every second. Thank God, I thought, looking down at Mark's terrified face. The police cruiser screeched to a halt beside us, blue lights flashing against the house. Officers spilled out, guns drawn, yelling at us to freeze. I slid off the hood, hands up, breathing heavy. That man is kidnapping my son, I yelled, pointing at Mark. Mark rolled down the window, trying to explain, but the officer cut him off. Step out of the vehicle, sir, the cop commanded, hand on his holster. Sarah opened her door, clutching Leo, who was now screaming, Daddy. I moved towards him, but another officer stepped in my path, pushing me back. Stay back, sir, let us sort this out, he said firmly. I watched helplessly as they separated us, taking statements in the driveway. Sarah played the victim perfectly, tears streaming down her face as she lied through her teeth. He went crazy, she sobbed, pointing at me. He threatened to kill us. I stared at her in disbelief, realizing I did not know this woman at all. She was not just a cheater, she was a sociopath. The officer came over to me, taking notes on a small pad. She claims you were violent, sir. Is that true? He asked skeptically. I pointed at the house cameras visible under the eaves. Check the footage, I said, my voice cold. It will show who was leaving and who was blocking an abduction. The officer nodded, looking back at Sarah, who suddenly looked nervous. We will need to review that, he said. For now, the child stays here until we determine custody rights. But I do not feel safe, Sarah wailed, overhearing him. Then go to a hotel, looking at her disdainfully. Alone. The officer forced Mark to leave, threatening arrest if he returned tonight. Sarah went back inside, clutching Leo, refusing to look at me. I sat in my car in the driveway, unwilling to leave Leo alone with her. My dad pulled up 5 minutes later, having seen the police lights from down the street. He got out and walked to my window, his face grim. I called a lawyer, he said, handing me a business card. He is the meanest son of a bitch in the city. You are going to need him. I took the card, my hand still shaking slightly. She tried to take him, Dad, I said, my voice breaking. I know, son, he said, squeezing my shoulder through the window. We will not let her. I stayed in the car all night, watching the house like a hawk. At 3 in the morning, the lights in the living room finally went out. I did not sleep. I spent the night drafting emails to the bank, freezing credit cards, and changing passwords. By the time the sun came up, I had built a digital fortress around my life. Sarah came out at 7 a.m. looking haggard and worn. She knocked on my car window, holding a cup of coffee. A peace offering. I rolled the window down an inch, ignoring the coffee. We need to talk, she said, her voice hoarse. Talk to my lawyer, I said, starting the car to warm it up. Please do not do this, she begged, tear swelling again. It was a mistake. It is over with Mark. It is over with us too, Sarah, I said, looking straight ahead. You are carrying his child. She flinched as if I had slapped her. I can get rid of it, she whispered, a desperate plea. I looked at her, revulsion rising in my throat. That is between you and your God, I said, rolling the window up. She stood there for a moment before smashing the coffee cup on the ground. Hot liquid splashed against the door, but I did not flinch. She stormed back inside, and I saw my mom's car pulling up. My mom got out looking like she had aged 10 years overnight. She walked past Sarah without a word and came to my car. Come inside and shower, she said firmly. I will watch her. She is not taking Leo anywhere. I nodded, grateful for the reinforcements. I went inside the house feeling like a stranger in my own home. Photos of us on the wall mocked me, happier times that were all a lie. I showered, scrubbing my skin raw, trying to wash off the betrayal. When I came downstairs, Leo was eating cereal, acting like nothing happened. Daddy, he cheered, jumping down from his chair. I caught him, hugging him tighter than usual, burying my face in his neck. Hey, buddy, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Where is Mommy? He asked, looking around. Mommy is in timeout, I said, trying to keep it light. Sarah walked into the kitchen, eyes red and puffy. Do not turn him against me, she hissed. I stood up, putting Leo behind me. You did that yourself, I said calmly. My lawyer will be serving you papers by noon. You have until then to find somewhere else to stay. You can't kick me out of my own house, she screamed. Actually, I can, I said, pulling out the deed I had retrieved from the safe. The house was bought before the marriage in my name only. Checkmate. Her face went pale as the reality of her situation set in. She had no job, no money access, and no place to go except Mark's apartment. And Mark was currently unemployed, living in a studio. Good luck, I said, turning my back to pour Leo more milk. She ran upstairs, and I heard suitcases being dragged across the floor. My mom stood by the sink washing dishes aggressively, giving Sarah the silent treatment. An hour later, Mark's truck pulled up again. He didn't come to the door, he just sat at the curb waiting. Sarah dragged 2 large suitcases down the stairs, Leo watching confused. Where are you going, Mommy? Leo asked, his voice small. Ask your father, she spat, cruelty taking over her features. He is kicking us out. No, I corrected her, kneeling down to Leo's level. Mommy is going on a trip. You are staying here with Daddy and Grandma. She froze, looking from me to Leo. I am taking him, she said, reaching for his arm. My mom stepped in, holding a frying pan like a weapon. Over my dead body you are, she said, her voice deadly calm. Sarah looked at the pan, then at me, then at Leo. She knew she couldn't win physically or legally right now. She let go of Leo's arm and stormed out the door. I watched from the window as Mark loaded her bags into the truck. They argued in the front seat for a moment before driving off. I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding since yesterday. But the relief was short-lived. My phone rang. It was the lawyer. I picked it up. Brace yourself, I told myself. She just emptied the joint business account before the freeze went through, he said. $50,000 gone. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. She must have done it while I was in the shower using the old tablet. Can we get it back? I asked, gripping the phone tight. It will be difficult since her name was on the account, he admitted. But we can deduct it from any alimony or settlements later. Right now we need to file for emergency custody before she leaves the state. Do it, I said, watching Leo play with his Hot Wheels on the floor. Whatever it costs, do it. The next few weeks were a blur of court dates and lawyer meetings. I found out Mark had been using my credit card to buy her gifts for months. The betrayal went deeper than just sex. It was financial abuse too. They had been planning to leave me once the baby was born and take half of everything. The DNA test for Leo came back a week later. I was terrified to open the envelope, my hands shaking uncontrollably. If he wasn't mine, I did not know if I could survive it. I ripped it open, scanning the page for the numbers. 99.999% probability of paternity. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, weeping with relief. He was mine. They couldn't take him away from me. But the war was far from over. Sarah filed a countersuit claiming abuse and demanding full custody. She used the domestic disturbance call against me, spinning it as aggression. Mark testified that I was unstable and had threatened to kill him. It was 2 against 1, and they were good liars. My lawyer warned me it was going to be ugly. She is pregnant with your brother's child. The judge might be sympathetic to her situation, he said. Sympathetic to the adulterer? I asked, incredulous. The courts prioritized the mother, especially with a newborn on the way, he explained. I felt the walls closing in again. I needed leverage. I needed proof that they were unfit. I hired a private investigator, putting another dent in my savings. Follow them, I said. Document everything. Every drink they take, every argument they have. I want it all. 2 days later, the PI sent me a video file. It showed Mark and Sarah at a bar at 2 a.m. Sarah was drinking heavily, visibly pregnant, and taking shots of tequila. Mark was snorting something off the table in the corner. I watched the video, feeling a mix of horror and vindication. This was it. This was the nail in the coffin. I forwarded the video to my lawyer and Child Protective Services immediately. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the next day. We walked into the courtroom armed with the footage. Sarah smiled smugly at me from across the table, her bump prominent under a tight dress. Mark glared at me, his jaw clenched. They thought they had won. My lawyer stood up and presented the evidence. The judge's face went stone cold as he watched the video. Sarah's smug smile vanished, replaced by pure terror. Mark looked like he was about to vomit. The judge paused the video right on the frame of Sarah downing a shot. Mrs. Davis, the judge said, his voice low and dangerous. Is this you in the video? She tried to stammer an excuse, but nothing came out. And Mr. Davis, is that cocaine? The judge asked, looking at Mark. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. I hereby grant full temporary custody to the father, the judge ruled, gavel banging down. The mother is ordered to attend rehab and parenting classes. Visitation is suspended until further notice. I let out a breath, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. Leo was safe. Sarah screamed as the bailiff escorted her out, accusing me of faking the video. Mark tried to run but was stopped by security for outstanding warrants the PI had uncovered. It was over, or so I thought. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. I got the house, the car, and full custody of Leo. Sarah got nothing but debt and a child support payment she couldn't afford. She gave birth to a girl, Mark's daughter. They named her Faith, a cruel irony given the circumstances. Mark was in jail for fraud, leaving Sarah to raise the baby alone in a trailer park. I should have been happy. I should have felt vindicated. But as I looked at Leo playing in the yard, I felt a pang of guilt. Not for Sarah or Mark, but for that innocent baby girl. She was Leo's half-sister. She was my niece. And she was living in poverty with an addict mother and a criminal father. Yesterday, Sarah called me from a payphone. She was crying, sobbing, broken. She said she couldn't do it. She said she was going to put the baby up for adoption. She asked me if I wanted her. If I wanted to raise Mark's daughter alongside my son. She said it was the only way to keep the siblings together. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. I looked at Leo, who was lonely since the divorce. I looked at the empty space in our large house. I hated Mark. I despised Sarah. But that baby was innocent. She had my blood. If I said no, she would go into the system. If I said yes, I would be ties to Sarah and Mark forever. Every time I looked at her, I would see the betrayal. But every time I looked at her, I would also see Leo's sister. The lawyer says it is madness. My mom says it is sainthood. My dad says it is a mistake. I have the adoption papers sitting on my desk right now next to the DNA test that started it all. The pen is in my hand, but I cannot stop shaking. Do I save the child and invite the ghosts of my past back into my life? Or do I close the door and let the innocent pay for the sins of the guilty? The ink is drying while I stare at the signature line. My phone is ringing. It is Sarah. She needs an answer now. I pick up the pen. I take a deep breath. And I make the hardest choice of my life. What would you do in my position? Should I adopt the child of the brother who betrayed me to keep her with her brother? Or is the toxicity too much to bear?